Greetings, salutations, and welcome to the Kreeger cast. I'm your host, Patrick Kreeger, and I'm joined once again by my father, Whit Kreeger.
Yes, and I'm so glad that I can join my son, Patrick Kreeger.
What kind of intro is that? Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about your first job, but it was more of an apprenticeship, as it were.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you say that. It's because the first job that I can actually remember, I was a pin boy in a bowling alley.
I thought that was once you came to the States.
No. I was.
They had bowling in Germany?
Yes, they did.
I don't know why this surprises me so.
Oh, I tell you what. So I haven't seen any pin boys in the United States, so that was definitely something that was a throwback to Europe, because we didn't have, pin setting machines and things of that nature, at least not during that time. And I'm sure it's all different today. But
yeah, I doubt they have little kids running around back there.
Take you to the late 1940s, and I'm probably I don't know, maybe 6th, 7th grade or so. Anyway, I was old enough or tall enough to where I got this job as a pin boy. Now, what that meant is that these drunken Germans, were having a good time, were bowling, and it was my job, and there were two of us at the time, to set up the pins. Problem was that if you didn't set them up fast enough, they would throw the ball anyway. And pretty soon, you could be, while you're picking up pins, out of the gutters and wherever else they fell, before you could put them down, more pins would come flying at you, And, okay, so imagine, you have this bowling alley, okay? And so these two kids sitting up, like on a, let's say like maybe a 3-foot wall or so. Because what do? Once they throw that ball and the pins fly everywhere, you have to get your legs out of the way because you're down there at that business end. So, yeah, I did that for, I don't know, a few weeks. It was kind of like a once-a-week job because they had bowling once a week. So I did that for a few weeks, and I don't know what happened. I think I probably had enough sores on my legs and stuff like this, to where I just didn't want to go back. But that was, I got paid for that, so that was probably my first job.
I always thought your first job was thinning sugar beets.
Crap. Now, it wasn't, but that was my second job. It was a summer job in the fields. And I tell you what, that was a really, really great job. And the great thing is you had to, they had these sugar beets that were in a row, and there were maybe a dozen of us kids, during the summertime, that whenever they were first peeking their heads out of the ground. The thing was that we had to make sure that there was only one plant within, I don't know, something like maybe 10 or 12 inches or so.
Yeah.
And no weeds. Okay. Now, I said there was something good about it because you can't think that it was something good. You're in the, the dry dirt. You're a kid. You're bent over, and you're going down the field. And if you're not fast enough, you don't have a job the next time. So you got to keep up with the rest of them. The rest of the. So imagine, like a dozen people, of all ages, some adults, and but a lot of kids, out of grade school, going down there with a bent backs, and pulling stuff out of the ground. So I'm getting to the good part here in a minute. I've already promised you a good part for the... I tell you what, the good part was break time. When it was lunchtime, holy crap. You know, they were... the maids, you know, we call them maids. They were female workers on a farm. You know, they did the milking. They were milkmaids and so on. They did all the work around the farm. And they would bring out these baskets of bread and cheese. And if you got lucky, you know, a little bit of jam, you know. And I tell you, it was the best eating ever because, you know, when they liked you, you know, then they would give you a smear of butter on that bread. It was like, you know, the round bread, approximately, you know, maybe 12 inches in diameter. You see it around in some of the stores, like La Brea Bakery still has stuff like that. Crusty on the outside, but, you know, baked on a farm. Anyway, that was the highlight. And you worked from morning till dawn, to dusk, you know. And there were, you know, there was a break in the evening, but they didn't really have much to eat. It was mostly to drink because we got kind of dehydrated up there, you know.
I would imagine. One kind of funny thing, not that anyone out there really knows, but those of you listening here, kind of funny thing, the family you worked for was the Newlands, correct?
Oh, that was in the United States, the Newlands.
Oh, I thought the Newlands had the sugar beet fields.
No.
Oh, so my whole life has been a lie. 'Cause I always thought it was funny that you worked for the Newlands in Germany on the sugar beet fields, and now we live on a former Newland sugar beet field.
Yeah. It's probably my fault in how I tell my stories, you know, because they're kind of disjointed. But the chronology, you know, if just to kind of put that in perspective, the chronology is, you know, here I am in the maybe sixth grade or so. What does it make me, about 10, 11, something like that?
Wouldn't know.
So it started out as a pin boy, but almost during that same time, there was also that work in the field, you know, so in the summertime, you know, during the day, if there was work in the field, you know, you could do that. The thing that I remember, it was a day's worth of work was actually 10 cents or 10 Fennec. And I remember that I had, and 10 cents in Germany at that time was, you know, right after the war, was actually a piece of paper. It was a small piece of paper, you know, like maybe a tiny notepad, you know, like 2 inches long and maybe 1.5 inches or so, rectangular in size, and it said 10 Fennec, you know. Well, I took that 10 Fennec that I had, and you know what, I think this is what my parents gave me, because the idea was if you made money and you got any kind of money, you brought it to the parents.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that was the tradition. So I remember them giving me 10 Fennecs for ice cream.
Oh, I already know where this is going.
So Huber and I, you know, go to get that ice cream. And, oh man, it was something, you know, ice cream was a real treat. And so there was, in Germany, you know, in our town, there were several fountains, you know, just like iron basins, you know, and some sort of statue in the middle, you know, either spitting water or, you know, sometimes, you know, just peeing in water. The statues do these things, like you see them in Italy and so on, you know,
yeah.
Or a fish, you know, anyway, moving water. So I don't know what happened, but I think I saw something, you know, like a fish in that fountain or something, because fish were in there. And I leaned over and my ice cream fell into the fountain. Oh, man. And I, you know, of course, I only had the the 10 Fennec, and so I couldn't buy another ice cream. I don't remember who were laughing about it. I don't remember anybody laughing about it.
That just seems sad.
It was sad, because I went and I fished it out, as good as I could, and I put it back on there, but then the whole thing just kind of melted away, it was, it was sad. Yeah, so that was growing up in Germany. But time went on, and, also in Germany, if you're thinking about a career, there are two paths, basically. There's an academic path, and then there is a vocational path. And the academic path, you're about in fourth grade. You take a test if you're so inclined, or if your grades are good enough. You take a test, and if you pass that test, then you get to go to what we called high school, which is not the same as high school here in the States, but in Germany they called it the Hochschule. And so it was, the fifth grade was the first grade in the in that high school. And of course, I think it went on for like 7 years altogether, before you graduated. But when you graduated, it was essentially like a college degree.
Yeah.
It was full rounded education. You probably had, there were elective languages you had to take. Everybody was required even then to take at least English, and then some sort of a classical language, and you had a choice between Latin and Greek, and I think that was about it, although, French was in there too, somehow, because, I remember the students speaking in French, sometimes. So that was the academic route, and then the vocational route, you just kind of went through seventh grade, and then tried to take an apprenticeship or something. Well, I had the misfortune of being a real sickly kid. I was really sick. I missed a lot of school, so my grades were not too good, and so if you miss a lot of school and you have a lazy streak like I did, you didn't do well. So my math was terrible. My math was terrible. I was a good writer, though, because that was always, something that I got good marks in. My handwriting was really good. History, I was pretty good at. Anyway, but math was terrible. I never did quite understand, and I still don't understand today why I found math so abhorrent. But imagine getting a report card, bringing that to your parents, A, B, and F in math.
Yeah.
That was disheartening. Well, anyway, my dad and my teacher collaborated. They thought that I was pretty smart, and I should probably, even though I missed going into high school, I should be doing something. There were other paths that you could take subsequently, to the fourth grade exam by getting into special schools. So they tried to enroll me into art school, and that didn't work out because I took the tests and, the math. They thought, maybe the art was more important, but crap, I couldn't draw either, so there you go. So anyway, so I get to the seventh grade, and I really had no prospects, and you can't just do nothing.
Yeah.
Because, I was, I wanted to get into art school. I think I was just telling you sometime today that what I really wanted to do and what my passion was is to be a forester.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a game warden. Anyway, or, forest management, that kind of thing. That really interested me. But my dad was a machinist. He worked at Hermann Fauder machine Maschinenfabrik, Hermann Fauter, Weltfreies Maschinenfabrik, which produced gear-hobbing machines. That was our product.
What is a gear hobbing machine?
Well, gear-hobbing machines are interesting because they're the ones that make, beside the straight tooth gear, they can make helical teeth. And that was actually a Fauter invention, to produce a helical tooth gear.
Yeah.
And when you do that, the load distribution is so much more favorable, then you don't have the clashing and the noise and everything. And everything in your transmissions today is helical gears, if there are gears. And, in the automotive, the straight gearboxes, were called crash boxes because you had to match the speed of the engine with the speed of the clutch, with the rest of the drivetrain in order to shift gears, from one gear to the next. And there was always a crash involved, but helical gears solved that problem. Hermann Fauter actually invented that method of making a helical gears, and then the tooth on a helical gear is called an involute tooth form. That's just a special kind of curve, which, low friction, low contact. But anyway, so my dad worked for that company and as a machinist, even though he was much more than a machinist. He was not, in German, the word would be Feinmechaniker, which would be, he had a watchmaking trade, and engraving and so forth, so that's kind of what he, that made him especially good at this kind of machine building, So he says, well, if you're good enough, son, maybe they'll take you as an apprentice. There's an apprentice class starting. And so I applied, I sent in paperwork, and so then the testing began to see whether you are
actually capable.
Yeah, whether you have the aptitudes, for machining, for being a machinist, or actually, it would be tool and die maker, because that's what we really were, but more accurately, maybe machine builder, because we built these Weltfreies machines, the gear hobbing machines.
Yeah.
And just as a reference, if you want to look up gear hobbing and stuff like that, there's I think the company is still in existence, called Barber Coleman. They should have a really good website, and so you can kind of learn about what gear hobbing is all about. Because the reason I mentioned that Barber Coleman here in the United States is because they offered my dad a job, and it kind of helped us to get to the United States, ultimately. In the meantime, though, the German apprenticeship is 4.5 years long, approximately. So here I was, 13, and I entered my apprenticeship. I passed the entrance exam with flying color. In fact, I took another exam, which was an exam to, was like a crash course in high school.
Okay.
And they called it, in German, they called it die Förderklasse, because that would put me on the track of an engineer. If I completed the Förderklasse with the apprenticeship, then I had the background and qualifications to enter the university for engineering. Yeah. So that was the plan, So I went to that Förderklasse. There were 2 of us out of the entire apprenticeship, and there were about a dozen of us in the apprenticeship class. 2 of us, a guy by the name of Koch, same as the Koch brothers, you know what I mean? But that was his name. And God, this guy was crazy over Beethoven. All he wanted to listen to is classical music, And I was, rock and roll was just coming on, and I was more into that kind of thing. And so, I always thought it was a little weird. But Cook and I got along really good. And on Saturdays, we went to the Förderklasse. And the company gave us the time off because our workday was 9 hours, which meant that we had a 45-hour work week. It was not...
Yeah.
So we worked 9 hours, and then we had a half a day on Saturday. So they gave me Saturday off, 4 hours on Saturday. They gave me Saturday off, and Koch and we went to the Förderklasse. That was pretty intense training. What happened to me in that period of time, I developed a love for math. The strangest thing, my worst subject, I loved math. As soon as I got into algebra, I just loved it. I don't know why, but it made sense to me when the abstraction of algebra was easier for me to understand than, talking about, how, if you sell 5 apples for 20 cents and 3 pears for 60 cents, how much did you have? How much have you sold? And that just for some reason just didn't interest me,
Yeah.
But once I had algebra, all my, it was like the scales fell off from my eyes. So 4.5 years of apprenticeship. And what that meant is that you started the first year, we had our own shop, apprentice shop, that had all of the machines and all of the tools that you would need in your future profession.
Mm-hmm.
And you learned how to do this, okay? And then the rest of the 3 years, you would be out in the field. In other words, you start building machines and stuff like that, assigned into regular crews, to do your work,
Yeah.
And then once a month, you would come back into that apprenticeship area with all the machines, and you do a test. There was, a test. You had to build something. That saw was one of those things that I had to build. So oftentimes you had to make a drawing, put all the tolerances on it, or they would give you a drawing, and say and put all the tolerances on it, and then you had to make that piece. Now, what we learned was we learned how to use the chisel and hammer, for instance. That was probably the hardest because I think I still have a little. My left hand, by my knuckle, was so swollen, from missing, because that's what you do, and you're holding a chisel and hitting it, with your dominant hand, and when the master came around, and sometimes we used wool waste and a rag, to just kind of. Yeah. Put it on there so you don't hurt so badly, from hitting it with a hammer. When they saw that, they said, "Throw that away." That was just not acceptable. But even after all that hurt, pretty soon you didn't miss.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Pretty soon, you didn't even have to look. And you just, it was nothing, In fact, I'm still pretty good at that because of this, I'm not saying that I wouldn't miss, but probably not. Anyway, that was really tough. But we learned how to weld. We learned how to run lathes and make parts, milling machines, everything. Everything that a machinist needs to know. Anyway. All the time that I was an apprentice, my father and one of my best friend's fathers, they conspired, and they would have lunch and breaks together because they both worked at Hermann Fauder. and they decided that they wanted to come to America. And so this, for my parents and Klaus Beer's parents, was a process that went on for about 4 years, you know,
Wow.
from when they first applied, because at the time, this was now 1950, 52. It was really it was difficult for Germans to come into the United States because, you know, of World War II. In fact, you know, I was never too crazy about it. Loved the United States because I read all of you know, about the American West, you know, in Texas and Arizona. I probably knew more about the American West than a lot of kids did here, you know, that didn't live in the West, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was something that my friends and I were always, you know, cowboys and Indians was really a huge deal.
Who are the cowboy books you read again?
Well, mostly there was a German author, and his name was Karl May. He wrote profusely about the American West, and it was all made up because the guy wrote all of those big books in jail. Yeah, he was in jail for something. I can't remember for what, but you know, one of the titles of the books was I think he patterned himself after Fenimore Cooper. If you read Fenimore Cooper's, you know, Last of the Mohicans and things of that nature, that was like Karl May. You know, the protagonist, you know, in Karl May's stories was this superhero guy, you know, that was super strong and all that kind of stuff. And his name was Old Shatterhand. Anyway, loved America. But I really didn't want to go there as such because, you know, there was this thing about language.
Yeah.
You know, you had to learn English, and then, you know, German was really good, you know. And there was this other thing, you know, about we had just lost the war, you know, so I always worried about what the hell are Americans thinking about us, you know, because, you know, no matter where I went, I'm sure there were fathers and sons that died, just like in our country, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, the winners write the history, you know, so, you know, they have the right to be pissed off, you know. The losers, they just have to suffer. But anyway, so yeah, I wasn't too keen about it, and so I was at that time, when it appeared that we might be moving to the United States, I was just about 17, and I was kind of hoping that it would drag on a little bit longer because at 18 I could decide to join the Bundeswehr, you know, and then I wouldn't have to go with my folks to America, you know. Maybe I could join them later, you know,
Yeah.
not then. But anyway, so as it turned out, I finished my apprenticeship with Hermann Fauder. I put in my 4 years, and there was a waiting period to take your final exams, you know, which are state exams, which took about, you know, after, you know, so they taught you everything you could learn in 4 years, and then you had to take your turn as to when there was like an exam in the spring and there was an exam in the fall, you know, so I wasn't ready for the exam in the spring for some reason, and I'm not sure why.
Maybe illness.
Well, you know, as a teenager, I was starting to get kind of healthy. So it wasn't so much illness. I can't remember why. You know, maybe there was something else going on, you know, that the family needed me for. Anyway, I chose the fall to take the test. But that didn't happen because in the fall, we emigrated to the United States. You know?
Yeah.
So, But anyway, Fauda was nice enough to give me letters of recommendation, that I've completed my apprenticeship and so forth, in case I wanted to go to work here in the United States.
I mean, you did just put 4 years of your life into what amounts to a degree.
Yeah.
You know.
So the last time we had a podcast, I talked about, my first job in being a foreman in a machine shop at U.S. Steel, first job out of college. And there was nobody else, that was that young and a machinist.
Yeah.
Klaus Beer, my friend, lived in Detroit, and I'm sure there were some others that came over, but that just wasn't known,
Yeah.
So, let's see, the apprenticeship. It was fairly intense.
The tolerance levels you were talking about with the machines you had to build were just outrageous.
For instance, we learned how to, nowadays, the machine weighs on lathes and milling machines and so forth, they're all precision ground. But back then, the precision came from scraping the machine weighs. So the machine weighs were machined, and then they were scraped. And that meant that you had to, it was like hand fitting, let's say, a gun or something like that.
I was going to say, from the way you've described
using blue, Prussian blue, to find the high spots, and then you take the high spots off with a scraping tool, which is, it kind of looks like a chisel, but it's a long chisel, and it's hardened, and we had to grind them ourselves, and heat treat them ourselves. So we learned about all the metallurgy, that was involved in the heat treatment as well, because we had a forge shop, and and you had to spend time in that forge shop as well.
Yeah, you're basically capable of building just about any part.
Yeah,
that's a steel part.
Yeah, and made the drawings, for some things that you needed. I remember later on when I came to U.S. Steel in Chicago, a friend of mine had its TR4, and the gas cap, had a real little locking thing on it, that was it was just a small part, and but it was intricate, it had curvatures and everything like that on it, and it broke, and you couldn't buy one. It was a British car at that time. So I told him, I said, we can make this. So, I took my calipers and I measured it. I made a drawing, of exactly that part. And once I had the drawing, I gave it to our one of our machinists, and they made it. And then we put it on and fit. It had holes to drill and all that kind of stuff. So that. So you learned all of this kind of thing, and so when I finally came to the United States and went to high school here, the kids around me had no idea what I actually knew, what I was capable of, but I had to learn English, and I had to put in my, I think it was like 3 semesters of U.S. history, and there were requirements for getting through high school, as you know. But I had to do all that at night school because I only went to high school for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Then I graduated.
But you had prom in 1957, like the most stereotypical year for prom.
Yeah, and hey, I got my driver's license in a 1957 Chevy,
Which is just amazing.
In fact, I was telling you about that when we went to the reunion, my 60th high school graduation, just this year. We went on Morton Road where we used to do drag racing, and I was fortunate enough to take my family, my son Patrick and my wife, to the same road that as a teenager we used to drag race our cars.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have a car to drag race, but I was with the guys that had them. And you know, typically we had the girls out there dropping the handkerchief just like, you know, American Graffiti. You know,
Yeah.
it was just like that. And Morton Road, yeah. So that was the first time the Hellcat went over 100 miles an hour. So.
It's been over a year. I guess that's okay to say.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. I don't know.
Well, you know, it's all. There was no one on the road. It was safe.
Yeah, it was safe. And I still knew what the whoop-de-doos were, you know, so that was good.
Oh. Well, I think we should leave your high school days actually for another recording.
Okay.
So until
Just you know what? If we have just a couple minutes, there's about that apprenticeship of 4 years. We got refugees from the east, from East Germany. There were a few of them that escaped before they had a wall.
yeah,
Okay. Now these guys had a 2-year apprenticeship, and they were hired in as journeymen. They were the same age as we were with 2 years. You know, they were like 15, and they were hired in as journeymen. Why? Because they had completed their apprenticeship in East Germany, completed it in 2 years. What we learned in the West in 4 years, they learned in 2 years.
wow.
Yeah, wow. And so they made real money. And we were pissed, you know. But they were good. You know, they you know. So for us, you know, we thought that 4 years was
Too much.
well, you know, once we saw these guys, they weren't any smarter than we. What the hell? How did they do this? You know, that they learned everything and they could come in, they got hired in as a journeyman with journeyman's wages. And we were still apprentices.
So all this goes to show is that child labor is effective.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, we did. Okay, once you were like 13 or so, we didn't consider ourselves children anymore, which is,
Yeah, I mean that's
you know.
actually reasonable.
you know, we thought we were men, you know.
That's a little unreasonable.
Well, you know, my dad always, you know, talked about teenagers like this, and he called them the Halbstarke, which, you know, translated would be the half strong, you know.
That's actually a pretty good description.
So I had to throw that in because that was really kind of cool, you know, that these East Germans, you know, figured out how to do 4 years in 2 years. But they did.
Yep. They still couldn't help Stalin with his 5-year plans. Anyway, until next time, dear listeners, see you out there.